Welcome to the Joe Silverback Show. I'm your host, Joe Bunton, and I'm going to talk today about creativity and the imagination. I have been thinking a lot and reading a lot about how can we come to an agreement as human beings that puts politics and religion aside, so that it doesn't matter what your political beliefs are and it doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are. There should be something fundamental that all of us as human beings can talk about and conclude without getting into those concepts that separate us and divide us. And one of the areas in which that happens is most powerfully is around religion. And the ideas that I've been reading about, one author brings up the concept that all religion is merely just stories that have been created but are not real. They're just stories and mythologies. So I started to go backwards in this, and I always, as you know, I always bring it back to nature, and always bring it back to the question of how is it done in nature, and what can we learn from our history as natural living human creatures who are born of and come from nature and depend upon nature for all that we have. And one of the simplest ways in which I came to talk about this is that let's assume that we take all of our Christian stories about God and put them on hold, and we take all of our Jewish stories about God and we put them on hold, and our Islamic stories and our Buddhist stories and our Taoist stories and our Hindu stories and our indigenous tribal stories, and on and on and on and on. Okay? This includes everybody. This doesn't exclude anybody. But I just as many religions as there are countries. So let's just accept that for a moment, that we're just going to suspend what people call the mythologies, the creation stories that religions are founded upon. Just put that aside for a moment and imagine that we're going to go back in time before these religions evolved. So if we know that Hinduism, evolved 4,000 years ago, and Judaism evolved 3,000 years ago, and Christianity evolved 2,500 years ago, we're just going to put that, we're going to go back further. We're going to go back further before the written word, and we're going to go back further before we had anything that we could definitely use to bring massive numbers of people into agreement on religion. And we're going to go back to just small groups of tribal peoples that were spread out all over the place. And what did they have in common? So one of the things that they had in common was their utter dependence upon the sun for warmth and for light. Without the sun, they couldn't see anything at nighttime, and without the sun, they could freeze. So the sun became very early on in the picture, a source of life in all human beings' consciousness. Water was equally a source of life for all human beings, and that became part of our collective consciousness. So it's no accident that science has determined that all life evolved from the sea, and it's no accident that science has shown us that without the sun, no life exists on Earth at all. And we can just stick with those two, the ocean and the sun. And we can go down to the ocean, we could go to the seashore, or we can conceive of the seashore in our mind, and we can go back in time to when life began, or at least when we speculate it began, and we can be grateful for the ocean, and we can be grateful for the life that evolved from the ocean that gave us life. We can equally look at the ocean as a source of food for us, and we can look at the rivers and streams as sources of food for us. And we can look at the streams and rivers as a source of water for us, and we can be grateful for these as well. There's no way we can have the sun on our body and not feel the pleasure that it brings us, and not feel the joy that being warm brings us, especially without it if we're going to be cold. So we can hold in here, and we can hold in here thankfulness and gratitude for the sun. And we can visualize that early man saw and felt and experienced the sun as something that was the giver of life and the giver of light. And he developed some consciousness, some awareness that this sun was a magical creator. And maybe he called him the sun god. Maybe he called him some other name. It doesn't matter the name. All that matters is the consciousness in here and here, the awareness of the sun as the giver of life. And maybe early man did this with the tree, and maybe he did it with the deer, and maybe he did it with all living beings that brought him something without which he knew he could not exist. So the sun, the sea, the river, the tree, the plants and animals that brought myself and my family and my clan and my tribe living sustenance, life-sustaining energy, warmth, etc. These became part of my consciousness of things that I knew that I couldn't live without. And therefore, when I saw them and when I experienced them, I experienced gratitude and even deep pleasure. So imagine that whatever your religion is, whatever your sense of divine is, whatever the story is behind that, there's an awareness of gratitude and thankfulness for being given the life that you have and been given all these beautiful creations. So I think we can all agree that thankful appreciation, deep gratitude for all that nature brings us, inside of us and outside of us, can be made sacred. That's it. Just reflect on it a little bit. I'm going to talk a lot more about consciousness, and I'm going to talk more about creative imagination and how, if somebody says to you it's just all in your mind, it's just all imagination, well, that means that I have a choice. And if my choice is to feel and think this particular way, and that makes me feel good, and that makes me aware of the gifts of life that exist, I don't need to know the story of how they came into existence in order to be grateful and be thankful and to give gratitude for having these gifts in my life. That's what I'm thinking about, and love to hear your responses.